Well, no great amount of force was required to do that. They both came free relatively easily. So that's our central lens component here. And the rear component. Now why is that tight on its thread? It was coming loose and now it's jammed up. It really does not want to come loose. I'll put a drop of solvent on that thread. I'm just using some naphtha, nothing dramatic. Here I'm just running the lens back in, and it's certainly free at that point, but then it's stiffened up. Might be a touch of lacquer or something on the surface further in. Now where was I? Oh, you're getting this lens loose. What is going on with this lens? I'll put a drop of solvent down there. Something's holding that up. I'm not sure what it is. It's a brass lens and it's in an aluminium case. It's not corrosion. It starts turning and then it stops. Yeah, that did it. Came out without a murmur. So, let's just run around that lens thread. I've got some acetone on the end of a cotton bud here. And the same in the rear of the case. There's a tight spot still. Must be a damaged thread on something. It starts okay. The thread looks a little bit clogged, like there's paint or something in it. Feels a little bit rough. This is on the brass. It's not a serious issue. If it was a serious issue, if it was a lens, if it was something we needed to be able to screw in and out for adjustment, then the answer there would be to put a bit of brass on. Metal polish in here and then work it backwards and forwards, and the high spots would just polish off and it would be free. But to be honest, that's not a problem that's worth chasing. It's of no consequence to us. So I have my shutter here, in 1,000 pieces. And I will have to clean all the pieces and put them back together. So first of all, I'll sort out some of these pieces so I'm not tripping over everything. And I think I will start by putting the lens components all together in one place. And the front components from the outside of the shutter, they can go all in one place too. Those 4 screws. That slims things down a bit. The mechanism plate and its componentry I'll put in here. I was just doing a Retina 2A, which has basically the same shutter as this, so this is just deja vu. Normally I start with the shutters by working on the shutter case and the diaphragm components for the shutter case, so I'll get those pieces together. One. Of course the screws have scattered to the 4 winds, have they? 2. 3. That's the 3rd screw. These other screws are for the shutter, for the retainer plate on the shutter. 1, 2, 3, 4. Blade actuating ring. That's from the shutter case. I'll put that with the diaphragm components. There's nothing there that I don't recognise. Everything looks exactly as I'd expect to see. And I will start . I'll start with the shutter case, and I'll start with some naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid, this stuff, and a cotton bud, and just swab out that case. What I'm looking to do is remove dust and dirt, more importantly remove any oil or grease or other contaminants of that nature. That case is good. This is the retaining plate for the diaphragm blades. One side of this plate faces the diaphragm blades, the other side faces the shutter blades. This is the shutter blade side. You can tell because it has 5 small indents in there. And that's the dirty side, so it tells me the shutter blades were probably slightly oily. So this plate needs to be clean and especially free from any oils. In an ideal world, the plate would be nice and smooth and show no signs of any corrosion, and this one is actually quite good. Very common for them to have fingerprints embossed into them. People have picked parts up between thumb and finger. The skin oils will promote corrosion, and that etches fingerprints into the chemically blackened surfaces here. You can see a touch of corrosion there at this point. It's a bit of a random pattern, doesn't particularly look like fingerprints, and normally it does look like fingerprints. So here's the settings ring from the back of the shutter. This is dirtier because it's from outside the shutter. None of the controls are particularly easy to access on the Contessa. People probably end up poking their fingers into places they wouldn't otherwise have to poke them into. Right, it's that piece. And that brings me to the blades. And the blades, there's 10 blades, and they all need to be carefully swabbed with some naphtha. These blades look quite clean. The blades are not symmetrical. The rivets, you've got two there, the rivets are closer to the centre line of the blade at this end, and at the end closer to the outside edge of the blade at that end. They only go in place one way, so once they're all cleaned I lay them all out in one direction so that as I pick the components up it's easy to pick them up and put them in correctly. Well, these components just need to be swabbed with naphtha, and because they are pretty clean looking, they're not going to require much attention at all. So normally I use a pair of tweezers to manipulate them, and I usually just hold them by the rivet and then just wipe the blade. There's virtually nothing coming off those. I will clean those 10 blades and bring you back when I'm ready to do the reassembly. I'm just going to reassemble the diaphragm blades. I'll start here on the jig, and this plate is dead flat on one side. That's it. Flat side should be up. The side with the 5 small indentations should be down. I've got my blades all carefully laid out so that I can pick them up in the correct orientation, because of course they're not symmetrical. And the little rivets that are closer to the centre line of the blade go into the holes here on the retainer plate. These blades are in quite good condition. They're pretty flat. If diaphragm blades have been contaminated with oil at any stage, they tend to stick together, and as the aperture settings ring is moved, that distorts the blades because they don't want to move, and then you end up with blades that don't lie flat. And blades that don't lie flat are difficult to get seated correctly. As you can see, as I'm getting further around here, I've got to pull back the earliest blades to expose the hole for the last few blades. It's a windy day here in Dunedin. You can probably hear the wind in the background. Alright, so all the blades are positioned. Now I've got to lift the first blades back over the top of the last blades. Without disturbing anything. Without lifting any of the pivots out of their holes. Usually that goes pretty smoothly. Sometimes one blade will lift out of the hole, and I've got to muck around and get it back in place, and sometimes it just turns into an utter disaster and you have to start again. But that's okay. It never takes all that long. Now one of the blades has moved, I can tell, because I can't even see its pivot coming through the moving plate here. Whoops. Now I've bumped that and I've probably disturbed everything. Where are we? One of the pivots is not visible there, it's just visible. I can pull that into place with the tip of my point of the tweezers. Alright, they're all those pivots are showing. I think I'm good to go. And the case only goes on in one position. Just removing a thread of cotton there to lower this carefully into position, wriggle it to seat it, flip it over, lift off the outside of my jig, put this down in place. And I was checking to make sure that the screw holes were aligned. They look good. There are 3 small screws that hold this in position. One of them is actually countersunk. The other 2 are plain screws. Why they did that, why they didn't just make them all countersunk head screws, it's one of life's mysteries. I've got no idea. I can understand why you might want one countersunk head screw, because you want that head to be down lower so it doesn't foul something else. But I can't understand why you wouldn't make exactly the same change, if that was required, in the other 2 positions, to avoid, just to make it simpler for assembly and to limit the number of different fasteners that were required to assemble the shutter. I'll just do that screw up very lightly. I'm not sure that the pivots are all in position, because as I said earlier, it appeared that things weren't sitting correctly, and I can see that they're not. Let's put a little bit of, do that screw up lightly so that pivot doesn't move. Pull that one in position. There's one here. That's it, all 10 are in position. Do those screws up lightly. Never do them up tight in case something's shifted. One of the pivots might be out of the moving plate. But no, that's all moving smoothly, all 10 blades are correct there. So I'll tighten up these 3 screws now. One of these blades shows a little dot here. I'm not sure where that's come from. I'll try cleaning that. It may clean away or it may be a permanent mark. It certainly doesn't want to go away. That's okay. It's not a serious issue. That's good. Now I'm just lining up the holes in the moving plate so that I can get them lined up with the settings lever that goes on the back. And the settings lever is sitting where? The settings lever, of course, was right in front of me where I couldn't see it. Check that I've got this the right way up. You can tell by where the pointer is, of course, at the top. That's where the 2 screws come through the setting lever, and of course they've got to line up with the holes in the plate there. I'm not putting any lubricant on there at all. I may come back and put some molybdenum paste on there if I feel that the action is too stiff. But there are no detents in the aperture settings. If there isn't some degree of friction at that point, the settings lever will be too easily knocked out of position. You'd end up with repeated problems with incorrect exposures if the settings lever got knocked. I'll do those 2 screws up and see what the lever feels like. It should be a controlled friction. It's smooth in its action. It's not overly loose. That feels good. So I'll just tighten those 3 screws up, no, 2 screws up. That's it. Our shutter case pretty much done there. Now there was one long screw that came through from the back of the case. That was the locator screw. Did that screw into the back of the mechanism plate? It did. So that one actually went through to the mechanism plate. That's okay. I might pop this piece to one side and start working on the mechanism plate, I suppose. The mechanism plate needs to be cleaned carefully. This is quite clean, quite good condition. The piece I'm dealing with here is the retaining plate for the blade actuating ring. It also has the little pallet wheel on here for the flash sync mechanism. This is the blade actuating ring. Again, this is quite clean. It's just a minimal marking there. That was from around the centre of it where it's been running on the aluminium body here, and there may have been a touch of graphite grease used at that point. The underside of the mechanism plate is where the blade actuating ring here runs. And on the top side, things to be careful of is this spring here. Excuse me. make sure you don't catch that when you're cleaning it. You don't want to either have the spring ping off or damage it in some way. Cleaning around the centre here, around the lens tube part, there'll be typically dirt and old grease around here. This one's comparatively clean. The main reason you need to remove all traces of the old grease is that it'll probably have dried out and gone sticky, but it also will have picked up dust and dirt over time, and as a result will act like a grinding paste if you're as the parts move. Now where's that other screw? Inside of the lens tube, that's where the lens screws in, of course, the middle element. I see here there's a slight scratch in the paint at that point. It must have been put in deliberately, but I can't think why someone would want to do that. Right, with the speed train, normally hold back the pallets with my finger, swing the speed train fully out the way. That winds up its spring, so its spring's not vulnerable to getting hit by the cotton bud as I clean those surfaces under there. And the speed train, get rid of that thread of cotton. The speed train's a little bit sticky, a bit slow in its action. That certainly needs to be flushed with some naphtha. So I will do that next.